Have you ever had someone lie to you about being kidnapped? Well, this is what happened to Keith Papini. Back in 2016, he was married to his wife, Sherri Papini, and in November of 2016, his wife just wasn't home when he got home from work. He was worried for her. He started looking for her. He couldn't get a hold of her. And he eventually found her phone on the ground with pieces of her hair and her headphones were tangled around it. And he just started to freak out. And this was in the middle of a park. And he was like, what the hell? So he ended up calling the police and he got her name out there. And he ended up doing a bunch of interviews. He even got People's Magazine to report on this. So this was nationwide. But luckily on Thanksgiving Day, which was around, I think it was 22 days later, they literally had a Thanksgiving miracle. She returned. Sherri wasn't exactly okay, but she was alive. And as time went on, Keith started to notice things didn't really make sense. The police were even this entire case does not make sense. Nothing is adding up. And he didn't really know. And so as he started to kind of help the police get information out of her, he and the police actually found the truth, and it completely ruined his life and his wife forever. And this is the hoax kidnapping of Sherri Papini. Hi, welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm Jen. With me is Kira. In this podcast, we talk about all different cases, true crime, mystery. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Sherri Papini and the hoax kidnapping that happened back in 2016. This case is now solved. It actually was recently solved in 2020, but everything that happened was just a giant shit show, and we're going to kind of talk about it all and the aftermath and everything. Before I kind of begin, I just want to give a little bit of some trigger warnings. We are going to be talking about abuse, emotional, and also physical. We are going to be talking a little bit about sex trafficking, kind of the cartel, kidnapping, obviously, and there will be conversations around racism, specifically towards the Hispanic and Latino communities. So if any of that is just, too close to home or you don't feel comfortable watching, you can skip on this one. All of the information I found is actually through information online and testimonies, articles, and even internet sleuth stuff kind of. And Keith himself, even they did a Hulu doc. I watched that. I've been following this case actually for a little while, but all of the opinions stated are mine opinions. I don't speak for Keith or anyone that is affected by this case. And again, if anything I say is wrong or incorrect or ignorant or anything, please feel free to correct us. So before we start, let's kind of talk about the Papinis. So Keith and Sherri, they were married in 2009. And they had 2 kids. They lived in Redding, California, and they had kind of just this little cute relationship lifestyle. They were kind of the it couple, if that kind of makes sense. They were just that kind of couple where you see them and you're their life is so perfect. They lived in this nice home. They had 2 kids and they were so madly in love. And Sherri had a blog and she would kind of talk about their relationship and talk about their cute stories. And actually, Keith was Sherri's first kiss all the way back in middle school, but they actually they kind of lost touch. And then a few years later, they got back into contact. They kind of met in these weird circumstances again, because when they caught up with each other again, they started having this cute little date. And Keith said this date was really fun and he had a lot of time and they were he just felt so happy, she was the one. But then she kind of mentioned something to him that was really weird. And she was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm married. And he was like, what? And she went on to say, well, no, I'm not married because I'm in love with this guy. It's because it was tax reasons and benefits. And that she had a heart surgery and she married him so she could get his insurance, and that he needed some of that too. Some kind of weird stuff. There's a lot of loopholes with that, but they were in the process of getting a divorce, but she just kind of wanted to let him know that was happening. And he said it was a little weird. They eventually did fall in love, and they got married in 2009. And, you know, like most of stories like these, their marriage was anything but perfect. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of like anger, Sherri texting other guys and Keith being kind of like, hey, do you mind not doing that? That's kind of weird. But to everyone else in their community, she was known as this great mother. And, you know, Keith was doing whatever he could to keep his wife happy. She was a stay-at-home mom, and Keith worked a job at Best Buy, and they kind of just like had this like simple little life. But let's talk about the day Sherri goes missing. On November 2nd of 2016, Keith comes home from working his shift at Best Buy, and he was usually greeted by his wife and his kids, and they would have kind of like, you know, their little family time. But when he got home, it was like probably around 5:30. They weren't home. His wife wasn't there. His kids weren't there. And his wife, like, she didn't work. And she usually would pick up the kids around like 4:30. So like this was kind of weird. So he thought like maybe she's busy. Maybe she took the kids out to the park, or maybe they went to the mall or did whatever moms do with their kids. He decided to call the daycare because he was trying to text Sherri and she just wasn't answering his phone. And he was like, that's kind of weird. And so he tried calling the daycare, and they were like, oh, well, your kids are actually still here. And he was kind of like, oh, that's weird. And so he's kind of panicking now at this point. He ends up calling his mom and asks her if she could go pick up the kids because he needed to go find his wife because he didn't know where she was. He decided to use the Find My iPhone app, and it pinged on a path that she usually would run on because I think she was training for a race for Thanksgiving or whatever. And it was also near their mailboxes. So he thought maybe she's there, but he also got a little worried. Like he thought, like, what if she hurt herself? What if she fell? Like, what if she got lost? Like, he doesn't know what happened to her. Like, for all he knows, she could be like fainted or something. So he books it over there. But what he found was just her phone, and his heart just dropped. Her phone was just lying on the grass with her headphones tangled around it and pieces of her blonde hair that were just there. And he was like, oh shit, this looks like she might have been attacked. So Keith, of course, calls the police, and he makes a missing persons report saying he doesn't know where his wife is. He tells them the whole story, and they send out this report, and the whole community was like so heartbroken because like, where the hell would she go? Like, it wasn't like she had any people that were like after her and all that stuff. So people are like freaking out. The kids are obviously like heartbroken. It's almost Thanksgiving. So he does a lot of interviews, like, you know, with the police and like just like networks and stuff. He talks to media outlets like ABC News, Fox News, and he was just doing whatever he could to get her face out there and get her name out there because he said that's all he needed to do. There was like billboards, all this stuff, and even People's Magazine was reporting on this. And you know, usually with like the first 48 hours in a missing persons report is like the most important time because usually that's when people are either alive or they're not. And usually if people are not found within the 48 hours, they're most likely never going to be found. So he just did whatever he could to get her name out. So there was like this huge manhunt for her. Keith had actually raised $50,000 on a GoFundMe just so he could get, I think like just resources and find his wife. But roughly around 3 weeks later or 22 days later on Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 2016, Keith receives a call at 4:30 in the morning, and it was Sherri. She was crying, and the police were trying to calm her down, and he said it was just like a Thanksgiving miracle. He was like, you know, he was kind of woken up like, holy shit, like she's safe. And he didn't really know like what to think of it, but he got down to the hospital where she was, and the news spread really fast, and everyone was just so happy that she was found. She was actually spotted 150 miles away from where she was kidnapped, and a trucker had actually seen her get kicked out of a car, and she just was a complete mess. She had chains around her, and she was completely like battered. Like she looked like she had been like tortured. Her long blonde hair was cut really short, and she wasn't someone who liked her hair short. She had bruises, cuts, rashes. Her nose was broken. She had lost a shit ton of weight. I think she was down to 87 pounds, which is very small. She was even branded with a Bible verse. She just looked terrible and her mental state was terrible, but all Keith cared about was that his wife was here and she was alive. But the police needed to know what happened to her. And when they came to the hospital, they were trying to get information out of her and she was just like freaking out. She was like screaming, crying, like, stay away from me. She didn't want to talk to them. She kept asking them to leave her alone. And like, the police were trying really hard to get information. And so they kind of used Keith as a tool. They were like, can you try to talk to her? Like they were kind of treating him like the middleman. And so Keith kept being like, just talk to me, tell me what happened. And it took her a really long time to kind of tell the police what happened to her because she just was not doing it. Like Keith had to talk to her and it actually took them a few days and they were able to talk to her in this like home that they were at. And they told her, no one knows we're here because she was like really afraid that these like kidnappers were going to come after her. So I actually watched this like police interview. You can watch like all of her interrogation and all of these things on YouTube. So if anyone's curious, but her video was like very interesting. She was like kind of acting almost childlike, which could definitely be like a symptom of trauma. That's just like my opinion on it though, but it really did take her a really long time to share what happened. It wasn't just like they did one interview and she told them. It took them like days and it even took them years to find out a lot of stuff. I'm gonna basically explain what happened according to Sherri. On November 2nd, the day started out pretty normal. She said she was wrapping a Christmas gift for Keith, and around 11 a.m., she decided to go for a jog. And she was like training for this 5K race. And as she was like kind of like jogging, she noticed this like black SUV and it drove past her and then it turned around sharply and it came back at her. It kind of stopped and it was these like two Hispanic women. One was a lot older and one was a lot younger and they were trying to ask her for help. So Sherri goes up to them to see what they need. And the older one actually pulls out a gun and is basically like, get in the car. And she's like, oh shit. So she said that she got down onto her knees. She placed her phone down and like wrapped up her headphones. And she pulled out some of her hair as evidence because she said she knew that Keith would be looking for her and she wanted him to know this is what's happening. And I guess that was her mind at that time. And then she was forced into like the back seat of this SUV and they put a pillowcase over her head. And she said she couldn't see anything, but she could hear. During this entire like interview, she was really struggling to give them a lot of information. She kept saying like, I think, I don't know, but she said from what she could remember was the road was very windy and they were traveling like a really long time to the point I think she passed out or like fell asleep. I don't really know. She said, and these are her words, that they were playing very annoying Mexican music. So just take that as you will. Then she said she randomly woke up in a room that was just dark. She was like zip tied to a metal pole with a chain around her waist. And she couldn't really walk anywhere, but she could walk to the bed, but she couldn't go to the door. She couldn't really go far. She had a bucket of cat litter to go to the bathroom. She said all she ever ate was a tortilla and some rice, but she was hardly ever fed. And she said they eventually took away the cat litter and she had to use an adult diaper. But she said like one time she was like in the shower and she found out that they were talking about selling her in like a sex trafficking ring. And so she said she tried to escape twice and she was both caught and punished twice. The first time they cut her blonde hair just completely short and then they branded her with a Bible verse. So she said she found out that she was going to be sold to a police officer, which is why she was so afraid of the police because she didn't know if they had connections. Because, that does happen. Sometimes the police are not very good people. And so she was very scared. She said on Thanksgiving Day, she woke up to the sound of a gun and arguing. And these two Hispanic women were just like speaking in Spanish. And the younger one had like, from what she knows, had shot the older one. And then she burst into the room where Sherri was and she fed her something that made her super sick. Then she punched her in the nose, broke her nose, and then she said she just passed out. Then she all of a sudden woke up in the car again. She was tied up and it was driving. And she said it was like hours of her just in this car. And then all of a sudden she woke up to the sound of snipping and cutting. And the Hispanic woman told her to get out of the car and like kicked her out of the car. And then when she was like kicked out, she was like running around. And this trucker had actually saw her. He tried to get her help and he ended up calling 911 for her. And then the police eventually showed up and then they called Keith and then she was taken to the hospital. So that's what happened to Sherri, according to Sherri. Her story was very detailed and some people find this very suspicious. Sometimes when people are telling stories, they can be very when they're fabricated, they can be very high detail. It's kind of hard to know because for some people, when something really traumatic happens to you, you can remember a whole lot of stuff. And the thing with Sherri was she was always having these memory gaps too. So she'd have a lot of like high detail of like random things, but not the important things. And it was kind of like really weird. But the thing with trauma is it affects everyone differently, and some people do dissociate. That is a way people cope. And so that could really explain that. But there just was a lot of things that didn't add up, like how no one saw her, or how they just said they were going to send her to a sex trafficking ring and then they just dropped her off, and there was a lot of things that were really weird. And like, as the police tried to dig into this, they couldn't really find any details. And even when they would ask her, she would constantly be like, I want to say, I don't know. Like, she just never really had like a clear thing. But the police, they needed to know what happened to her. And so she ended up doing this police sketch of these two Hispanic women. If you are watching this on YouTube, I will have it on the video there. So basically they had these two Hispanic women and told everyone to look out for them. And we will kind of come back to the Hispanic women a little bit later, but for now, we'll just kind of continue the story. So she ended up receiving $30,000 from the California Victims Compensation Board, and she went on to try and live her life as normal as she could. She stayed home. She was petrified. She thought the kidnappers were going to come back and like finish the job or kill her. And she was just dealing with a lot of trauma. She was just like overall like freaking out. It also was like affecting the kids. She just, she would cry and scream, and like Keith said he came home one day and she was like sobbing to her son. And by the way, her kids were really young at the time. Like they were like, I think they were like 4 or 5-ish. Like they weren't like teenagers, not even if they were, that wouldn't make it okay if she's like using them, because she was kind of using them for like therapy. And, Keith was like, hey, like, I think you should see a therapist. And I think she didn't want to see one. And there's just a whole lot. And Keith said it was really hard, but he wanted to do whatever he could to make her feel safe. And so he got a lot of cameras around the house, and they got like a bunch of new locks, and he did everything to make her safe so that if anyone were to try and show up, that they would have like full on proof, and just to make her feel safe, just to make her relax as much as she could. A lot of people did try to come to her home, do like questions, like, because people are so nosy and they want to know. And if she was out in public, they were always trying to like yell at her and ask her for help, because obviously these like interviewers are wanting their story to be popular. But she didn't really do anything. Like, she stayed quiet. She didn't want to talk about it. And so eventually there was this journalist blogger guy. His name was like Tim Scaro. I don't know how to say his last name. I'm so sorry. But he started to do his own investigation. He even went to like the location that Sherri was at. And he said that there was a lot of things that just didn't make sense. It didn't add up. There was like the way she said things it just didn't make sense. And so he started to go on his own blog and kind of write out all of his own findings. And there was a lot of things that didn't make sense. He didn't expect his like blog to kind of go viral. It got got around like 50,000 views, hundreds of comments, and it just went viral. But he ended up getting like a lot of threats, like even from Sherri's sister. And of course, like, you know, people are gonna be like, how dare you assume this woman's lying? Like, why would you do that? But so he ended up deleting this entire post. He didn't want any more hate. He was getting a lot of threats. It kind of opened this like wormhole kind of vibe where a lot of people started to dig into this. And it's actually kind of interesting because if you do look up this story, like even if you look up like Reddit posts from like 2016, you see where like a lot of people were speculating. People did start to find a lot of red flags and inconsistencies with her story. They said that things just didn't make sense. People thought that maybe Keith and Sherri were both in on this. They didn't really know, but a lot of people started to call her a liar. For one, Sherri, like they took DNA from her clothes and she had no female DNA on her clothes, but she had a male's DNA. But when they put it into like the police like database, they didn't find a match. Some people assumed it was Keith, but obviously he wasn't a part of it. I just want to say that right there. Like he passed a lie detector test. He did all that stuff. Like he was not a part of that. I just want to kind of put that there just in case anyone's thinking it was him. But the police did take Sherri's phone for investigation, and they actually found 2 men that were in her phone that were under female names. One of them was a man she had been flirting with since 2011, which, by the way, she was married. So there was that. And then the other was an ex-boyfriend. When they actually interviewed this ex, he stayed anonymous, but he said she was an attention-hungry person who told stories to try and get people's attention. And that she apparently lied a lot during their relationship about being abused by her family, by her friends, and even by him. And the thing about Sherri is that almost every single person in her life has said the same thing, that Sherri is a liar, that she's known for being manipulative. All of her exes have said this, and that she would do these things. I think they were talking to her ex-husband, the husband that she was married to before. He was the one who said, oh yeah, like she lied about having a heart condition, if you remember that. She would do this thing where she wouldn't talk to you for a few days and then she would randomly just talk to you and be some like crazy story. And like just her friends even said like she was that kind of person where she would just be like an exaggerator, or just, you know, those people where they always have to have something like super crazy that's happened. Like it can never just be like, oh, I went to the store and the Walmart employee was kind of mean to me. It's like, oh, I went to the Walmart and they were like punching me, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure that happened. But she was that kind of person. And you know, I read this from somebody on a YouTube comment, so take it as you will. Like, I can't fact check this, but they said that she was, like, in high school, Sherri was the kind of person where she would kind of come into class and then pretend to cry, and, like, everyone would coddle her and be like, what's wrong? And, like, she was just kind of, like, that girl. Like, she loved attention. The thing about people, I feel, is, you know, if one person says you're a liar or you are a manipulator, it's kind of like hard to know if that's just like a personal thing. But I feel like if every single person in your life, including your family too, also says that you're a bit of a manipulator and you are a liar, I think that kind of, you know, means something. The thing about Sherri is that a lot of people who lie like her, it usually comes from some form of abuse or trauma in your childhood. Not that that makes it okay to be a liar. Obviously, if you had to lie as a child, maybe to protect yourself or even your abusers, or you shouldn't do that now. Obviously, a lot of children tend to lie when they've gone through trauma because they're looking for attention, and needing attention isn't always a bad thing, but of course, as you get older, you want to cut that. So I think it's good if we kind of talk a little bit about Sherri's childhood and like her early life, just so we kind of get a clue into who she was. So Sherri was born in Shasta County on June 11th, 1982. She did not have a good childhood. Her older sister, Sheila, said their parents were very, you know, neglectful, and it was very abusive, that there was a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, and that Sheila was more of a caretaker to Sherri because they didn't really have good parents. Sherri had friends that said they would actually witness her mom drag Sherri out of her friend's house by her hair. And Sherri rather be at her friend's house because it was a lot more calm and, she would run away a lot of the times. Her parents claimed that she actually ran away and stole money from them, but we'll kind of get back to her parents in a second. But Sheila says she believes Sherri, lied as a way to cope. Just a way to get attention, like I said, with children, where, they look to see if anyone will notice them or will care about them, so they might lie. And sometimes kids, they make little jokes. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I lied that I had a horse. I don't know why I did that, but... But, some kids, though, they lie because, you're a kid. You don't know, how bad it is. But some kids lie more extreme. And she kind of grew up getting a lot of attention. And Sherri was pretty popular and she was pretty. She was your stereotypical skinny, blonde, gorgeous. And she got a lot of attention from boys. And a lot of people say that she kind of would date around and manipulate a lot of boys and men in her life to kind of get things that she wanted. In my opinion, I feel like maybe she was wanting to be saved. And maybe that's why she was lying, because she was looking for maybe a savior, and it can go back again to her childhood. But that's just my own opinion. But with Sherri lying, it's really hard to know what actually happened. I do believe she was abused. Her sister said that, and I don't want to take away from that because that's really shitty. But there was this police report in 2003 where Sherri's mom, Loretta, had actually claimed that Sherri had been self-harming, and she tried to call the police for Sherri for her self-harm and her destructive behaviors, but Sherri would go on to tell people that her mom had actually cut her and all these things. So it's really hard to know what is true, because if her parents are terrible people, I don't want to give them that pass. But I also think that it makes a little bit more sense if she was self-harming, because that's typical what victims will do, because that's just, a way for some people to cope. And I don't want to try and not believe everything she said. And there's no proof that she's lying about her parents being abusive, right? You know what I mean? I believe her parents were really shitty, and there have been people that have actually stated that they knew her parents and that they were bigots and that they just were not good people. So just kind of take it as you will for that. The thing is, with her parents being bigots, it kind of makes sense with this whole case, which again, we'll go to that in a little bit later. But Sherri had always kind of used abuse as a lie. She would always claim that she was being abused by everyone, and her friends would be confused. She lied that her husband, Keith, was abusing her and gave her a black eye. But this wasn't even true. Her friends were what are you doing? We were with you. And it was something to do when they were at a party. And I think she was playing on the Wii, and she her friend had actually knocked her. When you hold the weed, it slips out. It hit her in the face. And so she was lying that Keith had given her this black eye. Her friends were saying she kept going about how Keith was lying or was abusive. And again, we don't have any proof of that. So it's kind of I don't want to take that away from her, but I feel she was just definitely one of those people where she had to be a victim in every kind of way. And so, with this history of lying, it's no wonder so many people became suspicious of her, and even Keith was getting suspicious. I mean, back when Keith first saw her when she came back, he thought she was lying, but then he saw all the bruises and he felt really guilty because he was how could I do that to my wife? How could I think she's lying? Because how many people do you know would lie about being kidnapped? I hope none, because that's a really insane thing. The FBI had to actually be used in this entire case because the police could not find any information, and they needed to find out who these kidnappers were, because were these just two women that were a part of some sex trafficking ring? Because, sometimes women, a lot of people think in sex trafficking, it's men, but a lot of times people will use women to lure people into these things. And so the police had to get the FBI involved. So, for starters, Keith actually helped a lot with this case and this breakthrough. Sherri kind of was giving him a little bit of information, and she had actually mentioned, like she kind of explained to him the room, and he was able to give the police like, I can't remember if it was like a sketch or if it was like a 3D model of the room, but they were able to use that. And then she actually talked about a table that she could remember, and Keith went onto Google and just looked up a bunch of different type of tables, and then she found one that looked similar, so he printed it off and gave it to the police, being like, hey, here's this table. I'm not sure if it'll help, but it's something. This table actually is very important to this case. The FBI, they kind of went on to, I think it was like Sherri's Facebook, and I think they went through her friends, you know, they're doing all their stuff, and they actually found a picture of someone who was in connection with Sherri that had this similar table. And so they actually were able to use genetic genealogy, and this was like a major breakthrough. And so they actually found where this person's house was, and they had to wait for him to leave. He smoked a lot, and they were waiting outside. He like, you know, he smoked his cigarette and then he dropped it and then like he left or whatever. They grabbed it and then they took it back and I don't know how it actually works, but they used it and they were able to find the exact match of that male DNA that was found on Sherri's clothes. This connection led them to a man named James Reyes, who was no other than Sherri's ex-boyfriend from years ago. And the table was also his brother's table. And so they made a little trip all the way to go visit James and ask him some questions. They had to go to, I don't know how to say this, I'm so sorry, Costa Mesa, I don't know if I'm saying that right, which was around 9 hours away. So the thing about this is it's such a shit show. I remember watching this. They have the whole like police recording on YouTube. And at first, like, James is kind of like, they ask him if he knew Sherri, and he's like, oh yeah, like, she was my ex-girlfriend. And they're like, when have you spoken to her last? And he's like, oh, like, a long time ago. And he's kind of not giving them a lot of information. But he's kind of, like, very quiet. But the thing about this case, and this, it makes me laugh, I'm sorry. But he had, like, a parrot. The parrot got out of its cage and started flying out, and it flew out of his house, and the police officers are chasing after this like parrot, and it goes like under like a car, and they're trying to like get it out. And eventually, after they finally catch this bird, that's when Keith kind of starts to confess. And a lot of people, I saw this comment on YouTube where they said it felt like almost like in a movie where it's like the bird was like symbolic to like the secret being let out, and then the police helped him confess. The entire time, James is kind of like a very unique kind of person, because when they ask him questions, he's kind of like not really making sense, like talking about things that don't really make sense to the question. Like he starts talking about how, oh yeah, I knew Sherri. Oh, I'm taking care of my sick family member. And it's like, well, that's not what they were asking. But here's what happened. And this is exactly what actually happened. So James said he actually had been texting Sherri since 2015. And she had actually told him that she missed him a lot because they dated years ago. And she missed what they had, and that Keith was abusing her. And so James was really worried, and he asked her what he could do to help her. And she tells him to rent a car and pick her up. And he says, of course. So he agrees. He picks Sherri up, and from like where she went missing, where her phone was, she just left her phone there. She got in the back of his car, and they drove 9 hours. And she stayed in his house for a few weeks. He said that she was already acting really strange. She kind of kept to herself, but he thought maybe she just needed some time. But then he said he started to notice that she began to hurt herself. She was like bruising herself, burning herself. And then she asked James to take a hockey stick and hit her across the face and to break her nose and to even brand her. And he did, which is a little weird that he did that. I mean, I know that if I had a friend was like, could you pick me up? I'm being abused, and then asked me to physically harm them, I would assume they were trying to like frame me for the abuse. The police were able to fact check this entire story. They were able to use receipts from when he bought the branding stuff, when he bought the rental car. They were able to check his phone, his work schedule, and it all lined up. They even asked his cousin while they were there, and the cousin was like, oh yeah, she was here. Like, she was just like kicking back. Eventually, it was just like one day, Sherri just like woke up and just demanded James to drive her home because she missed her family. He said he was kind of like confused, but he was like, whatever, okay. I think he thought like maybe that she was gonna leave her husband for him. I don't know. But the thing that I have questions for about this is like, did James not see like the missing persons report? Like, did he not like, I'm sorry, if I had a friend who asked me to pick them up, asked me to hurt them, and then all of a sudden I open up, I don't know, Twitter, and I see like my friend is missing, and I'm like, oh, they're at my house. Wait, like, wouldn't you find that weird? Like, I would be like, oh, they're gonna frame me. Like, I'd be so scared. He ended up doing, like a lie detector test, and he was telling the truth and all that. So the police, they end up calling Keith and Sherri, and they're like, can you come down to the station? We have a huge breakthrough in this case. So when she shows up, Keith is actually sitting very close to Sherri, and this is important. But they go on to tell Sherri that they found out who did this to her. And this is kind of a big moment for Sherri because she's either going to find out they know the truth or that they found a random Hispanic woman who's completely innocent. But they ask her, like, do you want Keith to be there? And she's kind of like awkward about it. Like, she's like, and Keith is like, well, yeah, I want to be here for this. I want to find out who did this to you. So she kind of goes on to say, well, I don't want this woman to be like charged. I don't want her life to be ruined. She's innocent because she saved me. She got me out. Like, I don't want that. And the police are kind of like, well, yeah, like, you don't have to worry about that because there is no Hispanic woman. There was no Hispanic women. There was no woman there. And they go on to say that the male DNA, it was her ex-boyfriend, James. And of course, Sherri tries to go like, oh my God, what? Like, he did this to me? That doesn't make sense. And then she tries to say like, oh, I think I remember there being a male. And they're like, no, cut your shit. Like, there were no women. It was James. He told us everything. He told us that you told him to pick you up. You told him to brand you, all of this. And they say like, they were able to find the table, and the room that she described to them was the exact room that she was at in James's place because she stayed in the dark. So they were like, you told us some truths, but not the full truth. But as this is happening, you can see Keith, he's like sitting towards her, and you can kind of see him start to shift his body like away from her. And it's like very interesting to watch this because he kind of has this moment of like, holy shit, my wife lied to me. This is happening. Like, I can't even imagine being Keith in that moment of like finding out your partner not only was like with their ex-partner, but also was lying that they were kidnapped, and they also have kids. Like, I'd be like, what the, oh my God. And so he slowly like takes his chair and moves away from her. The police are pretty much like, stop crying, like, tell us the truth. And, Keith is getting really mad. And so he says to the interrogator, hey, can I talk to you? So he leaves, and you can see Sherri like in this like video, like being all like, oh my God, he's leaving me. But they try to ask her like, why did you do this? Like, is something else happening? Like, did Keith do anything? And she's just kind of like sitting there and she's crying about it. But she's like, no, like, James wouldn't do this. He loves me. And they're like, stop lying. At this time, they can't arrest her completely yet. So they let her go, and she tries to talk to Keith, and Keith is like, don't talk to me. You're a crazy person. He doesn't listen to her. She's like texting him being like, this can't be true. And he's just like, stop. He eventually, I think, tries to talk to her, but he does eventually divorce her. And he moved in with his mother and with his kids and all that. But before I kind of talk about the aftermath, we need to talk about the big freaking elephant in the room, which is the racism and Sherri's racist past. While like there was this huge like manhunt for these two Hispanic women who did not exist, there was a lot of fear mongering for like, a lot of people felt like the cartel was just like living amongst them and was going to kidnap all their like innocent women. And I've kind of noticed this a lot with white women, and I'm saying this as a white woman, where like they kind of come up with these like, they always think they're going to be the first victims in these like sex trafficking things, but in reality, it's usually people of color, especially like children or like orphans. It's not just like some like white woman out walking. Like it's just, I just noticed this a lot. And like during this entire stuff, like Donald Trump was president and there was a lot of racism towards Hispanic people and Latino people. And there was the whole build a wall and all that. And there just was a shit ton of racism going on and like affecting the community of people. Alan Ernesto Phillips, he is the co-founder of Northern Hispanic Latino Coalition. He told ABC News, this really shook the Latino community because Latino women were told, don't travel alone in cars. And like Latino people felt like they couldn't even be in their own group of people because everyone was like, oh, they're probably the cartel or they're a part of this. The thing with Sherri was she had a huge, huge racist past. I mean, no shit, obviously. There's no reason, like, it's so clear that she could have said it was 2 women, but she of course said Hispanic women for a reason. They actually found a Pinterest board of hers that was filled with, number 1, the branding stuff, like how to brand yourself, which was very interesting, but also racist quotes. Like, when you go on Facebook and you have that racist family member that shares like a quote and you're just like, oh my God, that's the type of bullshit she was like sharing. During this entire thing, they actually found an old blog that she had on a skinhead site and it was very racist. This post was titled Keep Walking, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's super long. It's incredibly racist. It was on a neo-Nazi site, but I will read a little portion of it. But in this post, she talks about how she was in this small town in Shasta Lake in California. Her school was mainly white people and that everyone knew each other and that she was this amazing athlete and her dad was this amazing guy. He had this great reputation for being her big fan and for also standing up to the Latino people because, what? Some context for this story that I'm going to kind of share. She goes on to write about how she like fought Latino women because they would get mad at her for being proud of being white. And she said, I couldn't help that I'm white. Like, why can't I be proud of this? And a little like context for this part is she claims that she was at a game and she saw this Latino gang throwing stuff at her father. And that she went up to them and was like, leave my dad alone. And that they were like, fuck off. And then she punched one of them and then like kicked them in the face or like threw them down. And then she says like 2 weeks later, they came after her. So here is this snippet. And it is incredibly stupid, by the way. And I'll give my thoughts on it after, but here we go. I was closing the family pizza joint we owned when 2 cars pulled up. I didn't even have to turn around to see who it was. I knew who it was. 3 Latino guys and 5 Latina girls rushed in and jumped me. I put up a fight, but I was clearly outnumbered and at a disadvantage. Jessie, the girl whose nose I broke, was with them. They kept hollering about how they hated skinheads, how all skinheads should be burned alive, and how I and my ancestors were all part of the KKK. I actually laughed in their faces at the inaccuracy of their statements. I mean, they were so dumb that they actually were funny. How dumb can you be? There wasn't even a skinhead anywhere in sight. Then I got knocked to the floor and kicked in the face. I took a deep breath, shook my head in disbelief. Can this really be happening? I thought to myself. Then I thought, is it worth it? Is being white and standing up for myself and all my beliefs worth all of this pain I'm having to put up with? Then I heard the echo of my dad's voice. You did the right thing. Keep walking, Cher. I'm proud of you. It was that pride that gave me the will I needed. Right then and there, I took a deep breath, let out a cuss word, and got right back up swinging. I don't even swear like that, ever, but somehow the word just slipped out. Just as Jessie kicked me in the stomach and the others hit me in the face a few times, then, before I even saw it coming, whack, one of them smashed me in the shin with a 2x4, fracturing my leg. but I kept fighting back so hard that they saw that they couldn't defeat me. So they all ran out the door. My house was 9 blocks away, and I limped the whole way home. I'm not sure how I made it, but I heard the sound of my dad's voice. Keep walking, Cher. Keep walking. I guess my point is that even though I didn't always understand why my life had to be a constant battle, our family values between myself and my dad carried me through. My dad was always there with me. Being white is more than being aware of my skin, but for standing behind skinheads who were always around in spirit as well, and having pride for my country. Being white is my family, my roots, my way of life. It's always there. There's no denying. It's nobility. It's strength. It will always be there to lift me up when I really need my pride, when I need to keep walking. So, yeah, really fucked up. Very not true. Did not happen. You know, this entire blog that she had on the skinhead site was just her being proud of being white. And, you know, the police asked her about this and how, like, you know, you don't like Latinos. Like, is that, you know, related to this entire thing? And she tries to say that someone wrote it and like framed her, but it just doesn't make any sense because like who would, because she said it was someone from high school, but this was written years after she graduated. So people were like, that doesn't make sense. She's clearly racist. She goes on to say like, oh, my family didn't even own a pizza joint, which also shows you like this woman just lies about everything. This is the thing that I find not funny, but kind of funny. So like she wasn't kidnapped. We know that. So when she was pretending to be kidnapped, whenever she would see hot sauce, she would like cry and get scared. Sorry.
What? Hold up.
Yeah, and it's like, listen, if she was actually kidnapped and tortured with hot sauce, I wouldn't be laughing. But it's the fact that she's a racist white woman who's afraid of hot sauce. And like, it's so unserious. And then the other thing is she couldn't be around Latino people because it was triggering. Like, be so fucking for real. Like, it just shows you like this woman was just straight up racist and hated Latino people, and that the only reason she said to Hispanic women was just because it was racially motivated. And one of the things that's so scary too is that they actually thought they found the Hispanic woman that fit the description, which means they found an innocent woman. And what's crazy about this entire thing is she would have been totally okay with putting 2 Hispanic women behind bars that were innocent. Like, she wouldn't have given a fuck. I really wanted to mention that before we continue on, just because, like, I didn't have anywhere else to put it, and I really wanted to make sure we acknowledge that Sherri Papini is very racist. It really, like, messed up the Latino community. And, I mean, they already go through so much bullshit, and then, of course, this white woman has to act like a victim. So, she was charged in March 2022 for making false statements to investigators and mail fraud. Her hoax ended up costing taxpayers $300,000, and not just from the Victims' Compensation Board, but from also the Social Security disability income because she couldn't work because of her PTSD. The whole city was pissed off because, I mean, who wouldn't? Like, they raised all this money, they gave all this money to her and her family, and all this bullshit. And she's lying. And on top of it, there was also victim family members that have been kidnapped. And she was going to them and being like, oh, we're going to find them. Like, this woman put up a lie for like 4 years straight. And there was this family, Terry and Marilyn Smith. Their daughter had been is still missing. Her name was Tara Smith since the 90s. And they said this is like a slap in the face to them. And there was another girl who actually went missing around the same time. And like, it took away from the police, like, their resources. And like, it really does show you the white privilege in this case, because a few episodes back, Kira actually talked about like Indigenous women and, you know, how some of them have gone missing on the Highway of Tears in BC. And like, so many people of color go missing and they do not ever get an ounce of what Sherri even got. Sherri was only missing for 3 weeks. Mind you, there are like women of color, people of color who are missing for decades and they never are found because they don't have the white privilege to have all this help, because, you know, Sherri had that kind of like that Instagrammable, markable life that they could use. It just shows you like the privilege she had. But the US District Court Judge, William Shub, he actually ordered Sherri to pay $309,000, but he actually roasted her and said, I don't even know if she'll be able to pay that back because who would even hire her? And I was like, oh my God, kind of iconic of him to say, but true. So she did make a statement, and I'm going to read it because it's so stupid. I am so sorry to the many people who have suffered because of me, the people who sacrificed for the broken woman I was, the people who gave willingly to help me in a time I so desperately needed help. I thank you all. That doesn't even make any sense because, I mean, she didn't even say, I'm sorry to the Latino community for lying to her family, to her kids, to her husband, to the people. Like, she's almost acting like she was kidnapped. It's like, obviously, she clearly has some mental health issues that she definitely needs help for. But like, girl, why are you still acting like a victim here? So she did serve 18 months. Which was double what the prosecutors asked for. So thankfully she did go to jail for that. From what I know, Keith has sole custody of the kids. She only gets 1 hour of like visitation rights. She only sees her daughter. Her older son, I believe, doesn't want to see her. I think her kids now are probably like 11, 12. I don't know exactly. Keith actually said there was a lot of craziness that she was doing to these kids because, like I said, like she was relying on her kids for emotional support and they were like 6. She also was like traumatizing them because like, okay, so remember the hot sauce thing? It's kind of sad when she was trying hot sauce, like, you know, she's like freaking out because hot sauce is so scary. But her son was like actually crying because he thought his mom was like hurt because he doesn't understand. And that's sad. But he said that one day he was with his kids and they weren't feeling good. And they asked him if he was going to tie a rag that was soaked with rubbing alcohol to make them feel better. And he was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? And they told him that their mom, when they would have a headache, she would tie a rag around their neck, soaked in rubbing alcohol, and then they would get sick, and then she would take them to the doctor. So she was like actively harming her kids and all that. She, like, honestly, this woman is just not sane. So I'm just glad that Keith has sole custody of his kids and he's trying to get his like life back together. Sherri did try to take him to court, saying she's now in poverty and demands he pays her $30,000 in legal fees. She has a boyfriend now who pays for everything. She lives in a 4-bedroom house. Like, how do you date someone who's a lie? How do I not have a partner and this woman who's lied like has one? Like, what? But yeah, that was the hoax kidnapping of Sherri Papini. Yeah, very insane story. I'm sure this woman is probably going to continue to do things, hopefully never to this level. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you would like us to discuss a topic, you can always fill in our Google form that's linked in our description, and we will see you in our next episode. Bye.